Okay, so now it's time to talk about 2D arrays of objects. Here I have a class grid just with an x and y variable that are just for now set at 0, 0, and it just makes a rectangle. So when I make one grid object, it's just a lonely little 50 by 50 rectangle up here. We're going to use the same class to make a 2D array that's going to be 10 rectangles wide and 10 rectangles high. We can use the same exact class. The only thing we need to do is we need to use pass parameters because obviously if each one of the rectangles is located at 0, 0, they're going to be on top of one another. So the constructor grid needs to take in int temp x and int temp y. We will be using the initialization of the objects to set the values for the temp x and temp y. We'll pass in values associated with the for loop to be able to create those temporary variables. So I'm going to set the class variable x to the temporary variable temp x and the class variable y to the temporary variable temp y. If I try to run this now, remember that you're going to get an undefined error because the constructor that you're trying to use when creating a new object demands that you pass in two temporary variables. If, again, I just choose, 200, 200 now, it's going to make just that one object centered at 200, 200. If you need a review on passing parameters, make sure to go back and watch the video for that. Okay, so now let's make this a 2D array of objects. So I'm going to add my two square brackets, grid equals new grid, and instead of using the constructor here, I'm going to set up the size of the 2D array. So it's going to be 10 by 10, 10 50 by 50 squares wide, and 10 50 by 50 squares high. Don't forget your semicolon. Okay, in the setup, I'm going to make those nested for loops for int I equals 0. I is less than 10, the number of objects we want across, I plus plus, and then right beneath that, for int j equals 0, j plus is less than 10, j plus plus. Oops, that was a colon. There, semicolon. Okay. Here, I'm going to pass in parameters to make each of the grid objects. I'm going to be using I and j to specify what those x and y variables are. So keep in mind the grid is 50 by 50y. So if my first grid object, I want at 0, 0, and then the next one I want at, it's actually going to make them vertically and then go over and make them horizontally. So then it'll be 0, 50, then 0, 100, then 0, 150, all the way up to 0, 450, before going back up and making 50, 0, then 50, 50, 50, 100, making those columns as they go down. So I'm going to say the object grid I, grid j, equals new grid, a new object from the grid, and then I'm going to pass in I times 50, because I want to space them 50 apart, j times 50. So again, that first object, 0, 0, will be located at 0 times 50, 0 times 50, so it'll be at 0, 0. Then we're going to take the whole way through the first round of the j loop, so it'll be 0, 50, then 0, 100, then 0, 150, 0, where was I? 200, as the j counts up, and then once j reaches 9, it'll go back to the outside loop, make I 1, and then we'll say, so then I will be 1, so it'll be 50, 0, 50, 50, 50, 100, and so on and so forth. Don't forget to close both of the brackets for both of the loops. Now I'm actually just going to copy these two lines because I'm going to need those two nested for loops again to be able to call my grid.display. And all I need to do here is just put my I and my j in, so it's calling display on every one of those 100 squares. And if we've done this correctly, we get a grid of items. Another way you could add on to this if you're interested, you could say something like, you could pass in an integer for if you wanted a grayscale color. I'm going to say temp C, and then maybe let's say int C here. C equals temp C, and then I could use a fill. I could use one of the parameters in here. Let's see. So I goes between 0 and 10. Grayscale goes between 0 and 255. So if I want to say I times 25, that should get us an approximate white to blacks. Semicolon. White to black spectrum. You can see all of these as they go across. Goodness knows you could do something like I times j. So the greatest value is 100. So we'd want to multiply that by 2.5. And you could get even, that will not give us an integer. We definitely need that to be a float in that case. Okay. Then you can get even a better gradient. So this is just the way to set up your grid. I'll have another video about interacting with those objects.